Hi gang, so the Great Rift has opened across the Warhammer 40k galaxy, the Primarch has returned, and it turns out everyone's a wizard now. Let's look at what happened in the next great plot event of the 40k universe, the 9 books that comprise the Psychic Awakening. So, Psychic Awakening was a massive Warhammer 40k campaign released in 2019. In the great timeline of 40k, it comes immediately after the events of Gathering Storm, video on that here, and broadly speaking, it charts the state of the galaxy after the catastrophic spread of the Great Rift, the return of the Primarch Robute Guilliman, the rise of the Inari amongst the Eldar, and the start of the Imperium's Indomitus Crusade. The framing device for all this is the Psychic Awakening. The advent of the Great Rift means that more warp energy is leaking into the galaxy, which is causing a greater chance of psychic phenomena, giving more power to existing psychers and increasing the number of psychers born, and this affects all the different factions in different ways. But what this isn't is a single connected story. There's no grand narrative here. Instead, the events of the Psychic Awakening are presented as a series of snapshots across 9 individual sourcebooks. A mix of single conflicts and short-lived campaigns across the galaxy that allow the books to do their other job, updating all the game rules just before the release of 9th edition 40k. But it's still worth going through because all these snapshots build up a picture of what life is like in 40k now, and the threads presented here have been expanded in other campaigns or in the Black Library novel series in recent years. So, let's take a look at the events of the Psychic Awakening. We start with Phoenix Rising, where we catch up with the ancient Eldari, still reeling since the spread of what they call the Dathedan, the shattering of the great craft world of Bieltan, and the rise of the Inari, a splinter group of cultists dedicated to the Eldar god of death, Inyad. The craft world Eldar are an extremely psychic species, and the influx of psychic energy had an immediate effect. Their farseers became much more powerful, able to predict the tides of fate much more accurately, but so did their various more warlike aspects, and the runes of warding that protected each of the craft worlds from the energies of the warp were burning out more quickly. This led many craft worlds to go on the attack. Warriors of Alaitok fought the Necron Hirk dynasty on the eastern fringe, and the Swordwind of Broken Bieltan fought against Chaos incursions on the maiden worlds of the Three Sisters, persuading many of the previously reserved Exodite Eldar to abandon their reclusive ways and join their armies. Other craft worlds were less warlike. The long-suffering craft world of Iandan had weathered numerous Chaos raids during the opening of the Rift, and wondered if the new cult could maybe move their entire craft world across the River of Death unmolested, and the skilled farseers of Ulthwé manipulated a string of human planets into a bulwark against the armies of Chaos, removing weak human governors and replacing them with stronger ones to blunt any Chaos assault before it could reach their craft world. Through all of this moved Ivrain, the prophet of Inyad, trying to find a way to bind all the disparate factions of the Eldari to a common cause, but she was in danger from those who wanted her dead. The Chaos Power Slanesh released the Monarch of the Hunt, Shalaxi Hellbane, in pursuit, and Ivrain narrowly escaped her first encounter with the demon on the dead world of Thresia. And when she sought sanctuary on the craft world of Saimhan and tried to persuade its chieftains to her cause, they were attacked by a fleet from the dark city of Komorra, where the great Asdrubael Vect of the Drakari had been fighting to contain demonic incursions since Ivrain first appeared. But she continued to move through the Eldari, even meeting with the disgraced human Ephrael Stern and her mysterious comrade, the Harlequin Kaiganil, tasking them with locating a solitaire of the Laughing God. Eventually, she managed to gather the leaders of all the various Eldar factions on the maiden world of Iathglas, where they finally united to defend the planet from the demon legions of Hellbane. 5 gathered champions fought against the demon: Ivrain, her Vizarch bodyguard, the Drakari witch Lelith Hesperax, the Solitaire of the Mask Sorrow, and the Phoenix Lord Jane Zar. But while they succeeded in banishing the demon, it was only a shade, a poor reflection of Shalaxi Hellbane, and the demon's pursuit continued. Back in the Imperium, things were looking dire. As the Great Rift spread its way across the Imperium, the forces of Chaos took advantage of the spreading darkness to try and spread their faith, the Word-bearers in particular corrupting whole swathes of real space to the worship of the Dark Gods. Their main obstacle in this was the Sisters of Battle, whose canonesses realized the scale of this chaos incursion in a series of visions. In the second book, Faith and Fire, Adeptus Sororitas battle fleets tried to push back against the word-bearers across the galaxy, aided by hitherto unseen levels of psychic power. Faith. Miracles, holy sightings, manifestations of the Emperor Angelic, all of these were witnessed in greater numbers than ever before, and it was definitely the God Emperor and had nothing to do with all the evil witchcraft everyone else was seeing all over the place. One example of this conflict was in the Taladus system, in the influential Veritas subsector, a jewel in the crown of the ecclesiarchy, blessed by the touch of Sebastian Thor himself. Cor Pharaon, Dark Cardinal of the Word-Bearers Legion, had seeded the system with chaos cults, and when the new churchman Morst Benefact clamped down on the populace with draconian laws, they rose up in revolt, just as the Great Rift spread across the skies. Emerging from the tear in reality, 13 battleships of the Word-Bearers assaulted the system with allies taken from the Iron Warriors and the Night Lords. The Night Lords silenced the Astropath's tower at Satropol before moving through the asteroid belt of the Tears of the Emperor, luring in and destroying Imperial Navy ships, while the Iron Warriors contained the local garrison world of Gredask, landing huge soul harvester demon engines to consume the energy of the planet. Eventually, Astartes' strike forces arrived in reinforcement, the White Scars engaging the Night Lords in the asteroid fields, while the Black Templars of the Rutherian Crusade led a costly assault on the soul harvesters on Gredask, and the Salamanders reinforced the heart of the system, the capital world of Benediction, under siege by Cor Pharaon and his word-bearers. And it was here that, as the walls came under assault from hordes of chaos demons, the spirit of the Emperor himself was witnessed, the dead of Benediction sweeping forth as skull-faced spirits and rising high into the heavens to encircle the grand honorificum at the center of the city, a radiant halo that filled all who looked upon it with renewed hope and burned heretics assaulting the walls to ashes. The golden light of the Emperor banished the demon hordes back to the warp. Meanwhile, half a galaxy away, the Blood Angels are having fun with a bug infestation. In Blood of Bile, the Red Scar, the radiation-soaked but populous region of space near the Blood Angels' homeworld, comes under attack by the cryptoid tendril of the Hive Fleet Leviathan. The tendril was named for its first target, the shield worlds of Kryptos, where the Blood Angels and their successors deployed to try and halt the infestation, but the war against the Tyranids on the surface awoke the ancient inhabitants of the planets, the Necrons, and only a desperate pact between the Necrons and the Imperials allowed them to divert the Tyranid menace. While the Shield Worlds held, the Blood Angels chapter fell back to Baal as another part of the Hive Fleet rained gribbly beasties down on the planet. The Angels on the irradiated surface of their homeworld were sorely pressed, but it was then that the Great Rift opened in the skies above Baal, and the blackness, the mysterious silence that accompanied the rift, enveloped the system. The Hive ships of the Tyranid fleet immediately fell into disarray. In a matter of moments, the Leviathans surrounding the planet had disappeared back into the warp, leaving the bioforms on the surface without any form of control. And this was repeated across the Red Scar, where feral swarms of Tyranids rampaged across planets. The Blood Angels and their successor chapters across the Scar found themselves hunting rogue bands of Tyranids throughout the system, the Tyranid swarms exhibiting way higher instances of psychic bioforms than was usual, possibly as a response to the rift. They took heavy losses, but they were unexpectedly reinforced by the Indomitus Crusade, in one of its earliest actions, led by the returned Primarch Robert Guilliman. As the rift spread through the galaxy, the Crusade attempted to shore up the defenses of the Imperium, and as the Red Scar was in danger of being cut off completely, the Primarch named Dante of the Blood Angels Regent of Imperium Nihilus, that which lied on the far side of the rift, and left them and their successors with significant Primaris reinforcements. Of course, back in the newly formed Imperium Sanctus, plots were still afoot. Magnus the Red, demon Primarch of the Thousand Suns, saw the opening of the Great Rift and the psychic power emanating from it as a sign. He returned to his ancient homeworld of Prospero, left devastated since the dark days of the Horus Heresy 10,000 years before, and discovered forgotten secrets among the ruins of its libraries and pyramids. He reunited his scattered legion, appointing a new rehachti and sending them out as emissaries, psychically calling the new psykers of the Imperium to the planet of the sorcerers to rebuild his armies. With their power, he would conduct a ritual to accelerate the psychic awakening 100-fold across the whole sector. But it wasn't just the newly emergent psykers that heard this call. Far away on Titan, the monitoring stations of the Grey Knights heard it too, and realised the danger the sector was in, tasking the Third Brotherhood, led by Brother Captain Stern, to intervene. Stern quickly realised exactly how dire this situation was and the perilous state the Imperium was in, and approached the Dark Angels for reinforcements. They'd fought together against the Thousand Sons relatively recently during Magnus the Red's invasion of Fenris, and though the Dark Angels were equally pressed, having weathered 2 demonic incursions in recent years, as well as the great changes brought by the return of Guilliman and the Primaris Marines, they still agreed to help, assigning Master Lazarus of the 5th Company, the first Primaris Company Master of the Dark Angels, to assist. The joint battle group linked up on the outskirts of Prospero's system, Forzair, as Magnus's great ritual began in the centre of Prospero's capital, Tizca. Time was of the essence. The Dark Angels' forces, led by Lazarus, deployed on the outskirts of the city, into the great shield temples that protected the city from orbit, in an attempt to open the city up to orbital bombardment, while the Grey Knights teleported directly into the centre of the city and fought through hordes of gibbering Tzeentchian demons in the narrow streets, inching closer and closer to the ritual site. But as they got closer to the centre, and though they were helped by the presence of the lost Grey Knight Grand Master, Kaldor Drago, the press of demons was too much, and their attack stalled. With the attack on the shields successful, the Dark Angels and Grey Knight Librarians sacrificed themselves to create a temporary warp tunnel, allowing the Dark Angels' forces holding the shield temples to redeploy and reinforce the attack on the city. At the height of Magnus's ritual, the Grey Knights and Dark Angels broke through the demonic hordes and planted a psychic beacon, allowing the fleet to annihilate the city from orbit before the ritual could be completed. The sacrifice was great though. Kaldor Drago, Brother Captain Stern, and Master Lazarus were all missing from the forces that managed to escape the planet. Of course, the Psychic Awakening also affected forces outside the domains of the Imperium. As told in The Greater Good, the growing Tau Empire had recently suffered a setback during the disastrous Fourth Sphere expansion, which had attempted control of the Chalnath Expanse, but suffered a mysterious warp disaster that wiped out much of the fleet, and this left Tau colonies stranded on the far side of a wormhole known as the Startide Nexus. As the rift spread across the galaxy, the Tau hastily assembled a new expansion force, dubbed the Fifth Sphere Expansion, led by Commander Shadowsun, who pushed their way through the wormhole to the stranded Tau colonies, finding them under attack by forces from the Death Guard Legion. They gave battle in the void, and a number of fleet engagements occurred in the depths of space before a small number of Death Guard ships managed to break into the wormhole, and the rest of the fleet instantly disappeared back into the warp. The Fifth Sphere Expansion, committed to their cause, linked up with the warlike survivors of the Fourth Expansion and began their push into Chalnath. The humans there were beset on all sides by Xenos invasion and Chaos uprisings, and the Tau began to make secret overtures to many Imperial worlds, their water-caste diplomats exploiting the needs of the planets to sway them to the greater good. But in some cases, their diplomatic overtures were resisted. On Astorgius in the Thoraxil system, the human planetary governors killed the Tau envoys, sending back the severed heads of one of each of the Tau castes, and triggering a brutal and fast-paced war. The pleasure gardens and forests of Astorgius became the site of dogged defensive actions by the humans, hunted down by cadres of battlesuits and skimmers led by Shadowsun herself. It took months of guerrilla warfare for the Tau forces to turn the tide, and the Fifth Sphere expedition suffered numerous setbacks. Miracles occurring across the defensive lines caused the Tau's human allies to swap sides. Commanders from the cursed Fourth Expansion proved so unconscionably brutal in their treatment of captured Imperials that Shadowsun had to withdraw them from the battlefield. But eventually, the Tau took the cathedral city of Iglesior Magna, brilliant name, and the remaining human forces surrendered. But a darker secret had been uncovered by the invasion. Initial scans of captured humans revealed a disturbing presence in their bodies, Tyranid DNA. The whole of the Chalnath expanse was riddled by gene-stealer cults, many of whom interpreted the increasing prevalence of psychic power in the humans as a sign that the Star Children didn't favor them anymore. As the Tau fleets engaged the defense forces, they rose up in violent revolution, eager to please their prophesied gods. On the mining planet of Hethos in Pekun, the Great Rift caused uprisings and labor issues. Governor Hatiar dispatched guard regiments to quell them, descending into underwater mines to restore order, but what they found was no slave mutant rebellion, but something far more dangerous. Planet-wide gene-stealer uprisings occurred, the biggest centered on the spaceport of Illyrio, so damaging that when the Tau offered an alliance in return for military aid, the governor was tempted. But tales of battlesuits slaughtering Imperials and cultists alike across the expanse kept her from agreeing. The Tau presence had more of an effect on the planet of Voratheon, where the gene-stealer cultists of the Pauper Princes co-opted Tau propaganda about the greater good to convert more and more humans to their side. When the Tau attacked the planet, their human allies turned out to be cultists, and the Pauper Princes remained a thorn in the side of the Tau advance throughout the War for the Expanse. Things were going a little better though for the Orcs. Across the galaxy, Gork's Grin, as they called it, had opened wide and vomited forth legions of demons, and the Orcs had great fun fighting them. Orc war fleets headed into the Rift, never to be seen again, and weird boys popped up in ever more greater numbers. The carnage fueled numerous wars as Orc warlords increased their power and influence, including the legendary Gazakul Thraka, who was sighted in many places across the galaxy. But many of these incursions were within the sphere of influence of the Space Wolves. Despite being reinforced early in the Indomitus Crusade by Primaris Space Marines, many of the Space Wolves were convinced that this was the Wolf time, the end of days, when their Primarch Liman Russ would return and lead them one last time, and they threw themselves into battle against the Greenskin menace. Eric Morkai's Sons of Morkai and the Black Manes fought Goth Orcs on the jungle world of Kiba, homeworld of the Obsidian Jaguars Space Marines. The Orcs had destroyed the Space Marines in a brutally cunning campaign, and so the Space Wolves forces, too small to free the entire planet, rescued the remaining Gene Seed and destroyed the abandoned fortress monastery of the Jaguars, lest it fall into the hands of the enemy. Elsewhere, the Drake Slayers, Death Wolves, and Fire Howlers companies responded to a call for aid from the Voria system, resulting in a guerrilla war in the polluted jungles, Fenrisian wolves sniffing out Orc ambushes. And the Iron Wolves, Sea Wolves, and Death Wolves companies fought an immense Evil Sun's speed mob on the rad-soaked world of Lecades. The speed mob had been teleporting across the galaxy, following sightings of Gazakul, but on the plains of Lecades, the wolves caught up with them. Bikes and battle fortresses dueled with land raiders and repulsor battle tanks, supported by fast-moving thunderwolves and bikers. Eventually, the Space Wolves came face to face with the giant battle fortress at the Speed War's center, a great tower on wheels crewed by a dozen Weird Boys, but as the battle reached its climax, the warp opened and the Weird Boys teleported the entire war to their next destination. And Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf, led the champions of Fenris in a massive Imperial holding action at Gotgard against a bad Moon War. The Great Wolf took command of the entire theatre, moving between the most intense war zones, his great company holding the line against the Orcs during the defence of the Basilica of St. Hermesinda. For much of the Imperium, all the humans knew was darkness, but the psychic awakening and the political balance of power that might result from that worried the Adeptus Mechanicus on Mars. Many of their Forge Worlds had simply stopped responding to communications, and so the tech priests dispatched reclamation fleets into the dark, armed with ancient and feared technologies to remind their vassals of their true allegiance. One instance of this was on the Forge World of Ordek Tharg, long thought lost to warp storms, but actually taken over by the forces of the Dark Mechanicus, aided by houses of Chaos Knights. They'd installed demon splicers on the planet's surface, huge machines that extracted the resources of the world by binding colossally powerful greater demons at their heart. As the darkness fell, they started to raid Imperial worlds, stealing away this new bounty of psychic humans to power the machines, but this was noticed by a reclamator fleet led by Magus Dominus Kroll, who detected rogue signals in the void and moved to investigate. Their attack on the planet was led by houses of bonded Questoris Knights, and the forces of the Adeptus Mechanicus dueled with Chaos Knights and demons around the great beacon known as the Kisberg. Eventually, Major Skrull used one of these ancient technologies, the Varlian device, to annihilate the Kisberg and any machines nearby, but the collateral damage to the Loyalist Knights angered their leader, the Baroness Sorden, so much she rode down the Magos in revenge. The detonation of the Varlian device did more than just destroy the Chaos Beacon, it broke the seals on those demon splicers, letting loose the greater demons bound within, who then flooded the surface of the planet with their servants in revenge on their former masters. Few of the Loyalist Knights or the Loyalist fleet managed to escape. Elsewhere, Fabius Bile moved with purpose through the chaos of the Cadian Gate as the Imperium reeled from the destruction of the planet. Unseen, he slipped into the Scourge Stars, newly conquered by the Death Guard Legion, and made off with the demonic artifact known as the Arc Cornu Contagious, with Typhus, the Herald of Nurgle, leading the Death Guard in pursuit. But rather than return to his lair in the Eye of Terror, he hid out on the fortress world of Dessa, base of the Shriven Chaos Warband. The Shriven was formed from the remains of the Brazen Drakes chapter, who had turned renegade and joined the Black Legion during this blackness of the Great Rift. They too were being pursued by the Torchbearer fleet, who had been tasked with bringing the Brazen Drakes Primaris reinforcements, and who then turned upon them when they discovered their new allegiance. And the former chapter master, Argento Corian, believed that an alliance with Bile might be useful. Within months, his warband were stronger than ever, but also addicted to Bile's serums, and the Death Guard were still in hot pursuit. Corian and Bile elected to ambush the Death Guard on the swamp world of Limaxis, luring Typhus to the surface while the Shriven fleet assaulted the Death Guard from orbit. But the Death Guard thrived in such environments and quickly turned the tables on the attackers. Bile and the Shriven were forced to call for extraction, but the battle had cost the Death Guard dearly. Meanwhile, the Imperial Torchbearer fleet were hot on their heels, and when they paused for supply in the Bellis Corona system, recovering resources from the dead refineries on Bearston Prime, Corian decided to go on the attack again. The Shriven pushed past the orbiting Imperial fleet and disgorged landing craft and drop pods onto the planet's surface, hunting for the leader of the Imperial forces, the Adeptus Custodes shield captain Tyvar. The Imperial forces, hopelessly outnumbered, fell back again and again, but while the battle raged, Bile and his attendants slipped away into the alleyways of the refinery, ambushing a small contingent of Custodes and Sisters of Silence and taking them captives. When Corian was finally assassinated at the height of the battle, Bile escaped once again and returned to Dessa, using his influence to take direct control of the Shriven, helped by the hideously powerful creature he created from the body of Argentus Corian. When the Death Guard arrived at Dessa, quickly followed by the Imperial Torchbearer fleet, all hell broke loose. They found a fortress defended by frothing madmen, supremely powerful Astartes fueled by neurotoxins that turned them into berserkers. Bile had betrayed the rest of the Shriven, turning them into little more than crazed beasts, loosed to delay the attackers and allow Bile to escape again. In the end, it took an entire execution force of Imperial assassins to slay the Corian thing, and Typhus was denied his quarry yet again. Finally, through all this moved the Indomitus fleets of Robute Guilliman, intent on securing Imperium Sanctus, that part of the Imperium on the Terran side of the Rift. Its battle groups were dispatched across the galaxy, including battle group Calades, which had been dispatched to the Nephilim subsector to investigate a region of eerie silence, void of any transmissions, even after the blackness of the Noctis Eterna had retreated. As they approached the zone, they encountered Imperial worlds in absolute panic, their citizens attempting to flee the entire sector. But as they pushed through the fleets of departing ships, they encountered the Zone of Silence itself, where the warp was as static and calm as glass. Beyond the edges of the zone, the warp was still in turmoil, but within it there was nothing. The navigators and astropaths of the fleet barely able to use their gifts, and even the warp engines of the ships hardly capable of functioning. As they landed forces on planets within the zone, their soldiers were afflicted with a strange apathy, barely capable of completing their investigations into the empty cities they found. Eventually, they discovered the cause. On the world of Mesmok, they found the first of many activated black stone pylons, defended by Necrons from a swathe of dynasties united under the genius of Illuminor Seras. The initial conflicts at Mesmok went badly, the Ultramarines and Black Templars forces forced to retreat in the face of stubborn resistance. As across the region, dubbed the Pariah Nexus by the Imperials, Necron assaults inflicted punishing defeats on the battle group. It was only when, on the advice of the rogue Sister of Battle, Ephrael Stern, Fleet Commander Meran launched a major assault on a series of dolmen gates on the ice world of Kerist. The battle was hard. Stern had expected reinforcements from the Inari after their battle at Eathclass 8 books ago, but they never arrived. But eventually the gates were destroyed, the faith of the Sisters seeming immune to the numbing aura of the Nexus, and the victory saw the Imperium resurgent across the sector. The immediate conflict came to a head in the Tredegar system, where Stern and Inquisitor Kyria Draxus led a task force to try and gather data on the pylons in the hope of figuring out how to destroy them. However, once on the surface, they were ambushed by Seras, and they had to escape into the warren of tunnels and Necron machinery below. Fighting a desperate battle for survival, the Imperial Task Force managed to recover some of the information they sought, but in the process released the Catan Shard, the Necron to bound at the heart of the machinery, a rogue element that would occupy the Necron forces for the rest of the campaign. And that's it, the entire of Psychic Awakening. As I said, it's not much a story as a state of the galaxy in the aftermath of the Great Rift. None of these plots have a solid conclusion. That's something for the players to decide based on the missions in the book. It's just a set of ideas and plot threads that sets up this new version of the setting, showing what sorts of conflicts are being fought and how the opening of the Great Rift has affected them all. We've also seen the recent in-game campaigns and Black Library novel series since take inspiration from this. The Dawn of Fire series, set during the early years of the Indomitus Crusade, crosses over with many of these stories, from the campaigns of the Word Bearers in Gate of Bones to the resistance of the Space Wolves against the Orcs in the Wolf Time, and games like Kill Team have investigated specific theatres like the Chalnath Expanse. Is it worth reading them? Maybe not all of them. I think if you're looking for inspiration for your army, something current that's happening in the universe, then maybe going through the relevant book might be useful. The lore parts of all these books are still available on the Warhammer Vault, and most of these conflicts are only a couple of pages long. As a story, it doesn't result in any grand change or new element like Gathering Storm or Arcs of Omen, but I think the stories sketched out in these 9 books will be affecting 40k for a few years to come. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like to keep up to date with the various crazy developments in the 40k setting, well, there's a video just coming up there on the right, or like and subscribe and join the Patreon, there's a link in the thingy below. See ya!